The goal is set and the aim is clear. In order to prevent the dreadful consequences of global warming and slow down climate change, the European Commission wants Europe to be the first climate-neutral continent on Earth by the year of 2050, only about 30 years from now. Therefore, the EU has set itself and its member states ambitious goals on the way to climate neutrality. The latest one being the implementation of the EU Green Deal and its policies. But the plan for going climate neutral, or at least reduce emissions tremendously by 2050, is not something new, but has been part of the discussion for a few years now. In 2011, the European Commission presented a plan called A Roadmap for Moving to a Competitive Low-Carbon Economy in 2050, which outlined the path to go to save the future of our continent. And this roadmap is the subject I'm going to present to you right now. So, Mrs. Umbach, fellow students, come with me on a road trip to the year 2050. Let's see where it leads us. Why do we need this roadmap? To find out, let's go back to the year 2009. At the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference, the member states of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change agreed on limiting global warming on below 2 degrees in comparison to pre-industrial level. While the EU had already set this goal in the 1990s, the agreement was seen as one step towards a common strategy to prevent climate change. In order to reach this very goal, though, it was clear that the Western industrialized countries would have to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions drastically, which means by 80 or 95% compared to 1990. In 2011, the EU Commission acted upon this agreement and presented the EU's plan on how to achieve this massive reduction of emissions. The approach is based on the view that innovative solutions are required to mobilize investments in energy, transport, industry, and information and communication technologies, and that more focus is needed on energy efficiency policies. The roadmap therefore provides a cost-efficient pathway to a cleaner, climate-friendly, and competitive European economy in the long term. When working on this plan, different scenarios regarding economic and global developments were taken into account, but as we all witnessed the past months, unforeseen things can happen very fast and turn upside down long-term strategies. But here's what the European Commission's plan back in 2011 was. On the way to 2050, there are 3 stops every 10 years on which a certain reduction goal already should have been achieved. The first stop is, or better said was, the year 2020, where the Commission set the so-called 20-20-20 aim, which means reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 20%, having a 20% share of renewable energy in the energy supply sector, and having a 20% increase in energy sufficiency. What we now already know, and the commissioners back then didn't, is that 2 of these goals were reached, and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions even outperformed the 20% goal by reaching a 24% level. What sounds kind of satisfying, and indeed is a step in the right direction, is only the beginning of a process, according to experts. Because starting out fast and ambitious is not only important for preserving the climate, but also plays a role from the financial point of view. The longer we delay, the more drastically we will need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at a later stage, and this is going to be costly. Therefore, it's important to take early action. This leads me to the next stop on our journey, namely the year 2030. While in the 2011 approach, the only target set for 2030 was reaching a 40% level of emission reduction, this goal was expanded by 2 additional points in 2014. At least 32% share of renewable energy and at least 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency. The last stop is the year 2040, where the Commission aims to having reduced the emissions level by 60%. This leaves 20% for the last decade of the road trip, with the target of an 80% reduction until 2050. But as already said, meanwhile the goal of the Commission is to become climate neutral until 2050. But how can this emission reduction work? What's the plan of the EU? All sectors of the economy will be required to contribute to the low carbon transition according to their technological and economic potential. But now let's dive deeper into the subject and look into the different sectors in a quick overview. We're going to start with the power sector. And as you can all imagine, electricity will play a central role in a low carbon economy. The analysis even shows that it can almost totally eliminate CO2 emissions by 2050 and offers the prospect of partially replacing fossil fuels in transport and heating. A wide range of existing technologies therefore have to be developed, including more advanced technologies such as photovoltaics that will continue to become cheaper and thus more competitive. The EU emissions trading system will be critical in driving a wide range of low-carbon technologies into the market, including the regulation of energy prices and technology. Other tools such as energy taxation and technological support may also be appropriate to ensure that the power sector contributes its part to the road to 2050. But the sticking point in this discussion is the expansion of energy supply chains throughout Europe. Given that the central role of electricity in the low-carbon economy requires significant use of renewables, many of which have different outputs, considerable investments in networks are required to ensure continuity of supply all over Europe at all times. Just think about wind energy in the north, which is effective in winter, and sun energy in the south, which is strong in summer. The building sector. The building sector provides low-cost and short-term opportunities to reduce emissions, first and foremost through improvement of the energy performance of buildings. The Commission's analysis shows that emissions in this area could be reduced by around 90% by 2050. One key part of the plan is that new buildings should be built in a sustainable way and therefore be designed as intelligent low or even zero energy buildings. The extra cost of this can be balanced out through fuel savings. A much greater challenge, however, is the refurbishment of the existing buildings and in particular how to finance these necessary investments. To date, member states have worked out smart financing schemes which are to push forward the most efficient building and refurbishment solutions. As in the power sector, electricity will also play a huge role in building, especially when it comes to sustainable heating systems, for example. Let's move on to the industrial sector. The goal of the Commission is to be having reduced emissions in the industry sector by 83 to 87% in 2050. Here the focus lies on energy efficiency, which allows the energy-intensive sectors like the steel industry to reduce emissions by half or more. As solutions are sector-specific, the Commission needs to develop specific plans in cooperation with the sectors concerned. In addition to the application of more advanced industrial processes and equipment, carbon capture and storage would also need to be deployed on a broad scale after 2035, which is very cost intensive and therefore can endanger the competitiveness of the European industry, especially when other international producers do not take action in this direction. Policies to prevent the EU industry from becoming uncompetitive therefore need to be implemented. The mobility sector. Technological innovation can help the transition to a more efficient and sustainable European transport system by acting on three main factors. First, vehicle efficiency through new engines, materials and design. Second, cleaner energy use through new fuels and propulsion systems. And finally, a better use of networks and safer and more secure operation through information and communication systems. In the first steps, though, it will be necessary to find smart solutions in improving engine fuel efficiency and in finding an appropriate taxation system which should start the process in slowly shifting towards a full decarbonized mobility sector. What also plays a role here is intelligent city planning and the expansion of public transport, while, and this is very important for people living in rural areas as we are, while securing affordable mobility. The reduction of oil dependence, the competitiveness of Europe's important automotive industry, as well as health benefits, are enough arguments, at least for me and also for the EU, to step up its efforts to accelerate the early development of electrification and, in general, of alternative fuels. These can be sustainable biofuels or hydrogen technologies. The agricultural sector. When we look at the graph here, we notice that in the agriculture sector, the reduction of emissions is not as effective as in other sectors. That is in part because of increased agricultural production in the future due to a growing global population. It's quite interesting that by 2050, agriculture is projected to represent a third of total EU emissions, tripling its share compared to today. Its importance in terms of climate policy is therefore set to increase, because if it does not achieve the projected emissions reductions, other sectors would need to reduce even more, which would come at a very high cost. Which measures can be taken in this sector, though? There are a lot of different ones, but all of them go in the direction of a more regional and also biological agriculture. This sector is probably the one which is the most difficult to control and find sustainable alternatives, as consumption of animal products is projected to increase in the future. As we can all imagine, these measures cost a lot of money. On average, the increase in public and private investment is calculated to range about 270 billion euros per year. This represents an additional investment of around 1.5% of the EU's GDP per year. A key question, therefore, is how policy can create the framework conditions for private investments to happen. But it pays off. Besides creating a competitive economy and provoking a structural change, there are also other aspects of sustainability, namely becoming independent of fossil fuels and reducing the energy bill, for example, or creating green-collar jobs, especially in manufacturing, renewables, and in the building sector. Millions of jobs can be created here. Another sustainability aspect is providing clean air and becoming a healthier society. Because with the roadmap, the EU Commission wants to reduce the levels of air pollution in European cities tremendously. And the best thing about this is that we as humans will become healthier, and that for a longer lifetime. As the road to a low-carbon economy in 2050 is a long-term strategy, it is connected to a lot of policies and measures which have been created in the past 10 years and are going to be created in the coming 30. A prominent one of these is the European Green Deal, which involves a bunch of other policies in this direction, some of which we have already heard about. For example, the European Climate Law or the European Climate Act. Another one, as already mentioned a few times, is the emissions trading system, which we're going to hear about in another presentation today. All that I've said until now sounds very positive and optimistic, but the question that inevitably arises now is, can Europe save the planet alone? Spoiler, no, we cannot. Europe's responsible for only about 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore even a massive reduction of our emissions cannot tackle climate change in a global perspective. This means that as long as countries like China, Brazil, Russia, or the United States do not take action, our efforts will unfortunately not pay off. But what we have here with this roadmap is a plan which doesn't include any detailed actions or laws, but which should act as the basis of a wider strategy and should mark the beginning of international cooperation and effort to reach the goal set, namely keeping global warming levels below 2 degrees. For me personally, this roadmap to a low carbon economy involves way too much shoulds, cans, and mays. But it clearly demonstrates that there is no alternative to moving to a sustainable economy in the future, and that Europe and the whole world should see this development as a chance to invest in smart solutions and generate the system change needed. 10 years have passed since this roadmap was presented, and as we already discussed, 2 of the 3 goals for 2020 were reached. But there is a lot of work ahead, and with the European climate law, the EU moves forward and finally starts acting on its promise. Saving our environment, saving every one of us. Because as famous Albert Einstein once said, the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. Thank you for your attention.